I'm Ashton Addison from Blockwest Capital for Investment Pitch Media and the Crypto Coin Show. And today on Blockchain Interviews with Matt Cutler, the co-founder and CEO of Blocknative. Matt, welcome to the show, and thank you for taking the time to come on.
My pleasure. Thanks, Ashton. Thanks for having me.
I'd love to kick off our conversation by hearing a little bit about Blocknative, some of the solutions that you're driving into the cryptocurrency industry, in the mempool and transactions, and then we can dive into the details after that.
Sure. So Blocknative, we're experts at in-flight transactions. So on-chain data represents value at rest. All the money stopped moving. We specialize in the pre-consensus layer, everything that happens while transactions are occurring and while money is moving. And it turns out it's a very fascinating area, and there's a lot of intricacies and challenges associated with this layer of public blockchain networks. And we operate a global data network that captures about 100% of public blockchain mempools, sort of the area where this all goes. And then we make it very easy for traders and builders to work with that data. So we sort of level the playing field as it relates to this whole area and allow new experiences to occur and new trading strategies to be implemented. So it's a pretty exciting time for us these days.
Very cool. Great background. And yeah, it's not something that I personally hear about often in the mempool, but you're right. There are a lot of different implications, information you can gather, strategies you can employ with this information. And I'm curious to know more about that, but I'm also curious to know more about your background in blockchain and why you decided to start Blocknative specifically.
Well, I like to say I'm a glutton for punishment. Depending on how you count, I've done 7 or 8 technology startups and other sorts of startups. I've built them, grown them, sold them, split them, merged them, taken them public, sort of all of the above. My very first company was an internet company way back in 1994, long before it was fashionable to do internet, long before it was fashionable to do it as an undergrad. That one was called NetGenesis and was the first ever web analytics business. And I like to say it was a 9-year overnight success, 0 to IPO. And at the time we went public was one of the top 35 IPOs in history. My most recent startup was called Collaborate.com. It was a mobile collaboration platform founded on the radical idea that people would actually use their phones to do work. That was an early exit to Cisco, which was pretty awesome. That's actually why I live out here in the Bay Area now. And I was an exec at Cisco for about 4 years before leaving to start Blocknative. The reason why I jumped in was once I started to tune in and pay attention to blockchain and crypto, this was 2016, 2017. I really felt like I'd seen this movie before. It felt a lot like the early days of the web. And while I was building in the early days of the web, I made a lot of mistakes. And so I sort of thought it was pretty unlikely that an operator entrepreneur like me would get 2 bites at the apple. And I have the opportunity to make all new mistakes this time around. So jumped in the middle of what turned out to be crypto winter, which was actually pretty productive for us because it eliminated a lot of the froth. And we're a team of software developers who knows how to build infrastructure. And so we were just heads down building. And we focused on the mempool pretty early. And it seemed like somewhat of an unusual esoteric area to specialize in. And, fast forward a few years and we look like we were ahead of the game, right? So sometimes lucky, sometimes good. And my business partner and I, Chris Meisel, he's our CTO. We've known each other for about 15 years and have worked together in various frames. So it's super fun to be, working and building and doing, net new contributions in such a critical area.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. And yeah, another kick at the can. And I feel like, this one is in perfect timing right now. There's a lot going on in the blockchain space. And I don't think too many people are focused on the mempool. And I want to elaborate on that more because a lot of people just don't know about the mempool, the transaction, sort of what happens before confirmations happen. Maybe you can talk about, what is the mempool and why is it such a crazy place?
Sure. So it's interesting. I always ask people, you've done a transaction, on the blockchain, you submit it and you wait for a while and then it confirms. You're like, like, what do you think happened is while you're waiting? Like, I've never really thought about it. I don't know. You go, well, turns out that your transaction, when you sign it and submit it, becomes a candidate for inclusion. And it goes to this area called the mempool, sometimes called the transaction pool, depending on which blockchain you're working with, where it competes with every other transaction that's pending for the attention of miners or validators to be included in a block. It turns out that almost the rules of this area, this pre-consensus layer, sort of everything that happens before consensus is formed, is almost entirely different than what happens on the blockchain. So when things go on-chain, they're immutable. They can't be changed. Well, before consensus happens, everything is mutable. You can modify and alter and affect transactions in the blockchain, in the mempool. And so you can replace them, you can cancel them, you can speed them up, you can affect them in other ways. And once your transaction gets written to chain, it's kind of set and fixed. It doesn't really matter what anybody else does. Well, the mempool, because it's a real-time marketplace and competition for confirmation, that what other people do can affect your transaction in all sorts of adverse fashions. And so it turns out that this is a real-time space where, hey, on Ethereum, for instance, a block gets confirmed about every 13 and a half seconds. But in the mempool, it's sub-second. Anyone, anywhere in the world can submit a transaction at any time. And so you have this discrete system of on-chain data, click, 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 moving forward. In the mempool, it's a real-time continuous system. On a public blockchain, everybody agrees on what truth is. That's the definition of consensus. In the mempool, there's no such thing as the mempool. There's actually thousands of unique copies of the mempool, each of which are slightly different than their neighbors. And when the network gets very congested, there's a lot of traffic. The differences can be quite substantial. So it's a very different type of problem and requires very different type of infrastructure. And that's why we started to focus on this, because we realized the mempool effectively affects terms of settlement. Does it settle, yes or no? What's the time to settle? What's the cost to settle? And what are the terms of settlement? And all of this basically results in transaction risk, and that most folks who are participants in the network aren't really equipped to deal with that transaction risk, aren't even aware of the risks that are happening, aren't aware when their transactions encounter problems, aren't aware what they can do about it. So this is why we built Blocknative. This is why we operate a very sophisticated, very expensive global network to basically level the playing field here, democratize access so that anyone who's participating can have the same view and can have the same intelligence that they need in order to have predictable transaction settlement. So it's kind of foundational. We talk about utility grade infrastructure, and it's sort of like no matter who you are in the network, you need access to this, you need understanding from this, and we're here to help out.
Mm-hmm. Definitely great background on that. Thank you so much, Matt. That really helps explain the difference. And now we're talking about how we functionally use that, right? And you mentioned working with developers. I'm curious if you can elaborate on how dapps and protocols work with Blocknative to turn that information into something useful.
Sure. So we work with builders and traders on the builder side of the house. These are dApp developers, protocol developers, NFT games, DEXs, for instance. What we do is we help with user experience. So we provide basically full stack of capabilities from low-level mempool data all the way to front-end libraries for things like selecting wallets. So for instance, if you ever use Curve and you connect your wallet and it presents a list of options to connect, that's one of our libraries. It's called Onboard, and it just facilitates connection of a wide variety of wallets to a wide variety of dApps. It's quite commonly deployed in the ecosystem with best-in-class support for hardware wallets as well. Then what we do is we provide visibility into in-flight transactions. So this is generally used to improve user experience. The basic idea here is knowledge is power. That transactions when they're in flight are somewhat opaque. I mean, the state-of-the-art experience is you go to your favorite block explorer like Etherscan and you press refresh repeatedly and hope that something good happens. Instead, what we have are libraries and capabilities that push information back to the user. And so dApps commonly will deploy our Notify library to provide real-time updates of transaction status, and that just improves transaction recency, frequency, and value. So it's a way of growing. And then for protocols, they build these composable protocols, and they need to know how they're being used in the wild, sort of what are people actually doing. And so we provide protocol monitoring so that protocol developers can understand where their smart contracts are being called and when they're being called and what those transactions look like. This is leading towards things like protocol protection so that you can begin to flag anomalous or attack-shaped transactions and potentially intervene. So it's pretty active on the builder side of the equation. We're lucky to be working with many of the top builders and protocols in the space, whether it be maker liquidator bots, whether it be synthetics, whether it be Curve, as I mentioned before, Yearn Finance, synthetics, Set Protocol, all customers and active partners of Blocknative, which is fantastic.
Mm-hmm. That's incredible. And it's great to see so many different groups partnering so early on as well. And speaking of early on, I know in 2021 has really been a year of a lot of institutional adoption, the most so far. And the retail traders are trying to stay on top of it, look for tools that institutions are using, figure out what they're doing so that they can stay ahead of the game. With these tools, are you specifically catered to institutional investors as well, or just retail traders, and like how can they go on to Blocknative and be like, okay, I'm going to use this information to give myself an advantage in this next trade or in this investment strategy?
We see institutional adoption totally taking off. It's been a very active segment for us overall. I think what we're seeing is institutions are moving out of proof of concept phase and moving into actual deployment phase, and they're really starting to understand the risks inherent in transactions in public blockchain networks. And so, hey, they manage risks throughout their traditional lines of business all day, every day. And they understand that the risks here are real, but different. And they need utility grade infrastructure to understand and manage that. And so we provide basically an off the shelf solution for monitoring large transaction volumes and trading platforms and ensuring orderly execution of trades from trading desks and things like that. And so it's really been pretty active. It's actually quite a different selling and engagement motion to work with institutional buyers, as you might imagine, and that's been pretty fun to get a chance to work with them. And then, we're just seeing sort of across the board acceleration of activity when it relates to institutional buyers, and also traders on the institution side getting a lot more sophisticated and understanding they're up against some fairly sophisticated actors, and they need to bring sophisticated real-time tooling to the table. And when they meet us and they hear about my co-founder who's ex-NASA and ex-Apple and ex-Spotify, and really begin to understand the nature of what we do at a technical level and sort of the low latency information that we provide, it's pretty attractive for those players. So it's been a fantastic segment for us this year.
Definitely. No, that sounds fantastic. And I'm also looking at it on the flip side, looking at this information, how can I take advantage of this, make a successful trade? The mempool there has a lot of information that's like about to go on the blockchain, but not yet. And I could also see perhaps noticing threats or vulnerabilities, or maybe there's a smart contract bug, or maybe there's a hacker that's siphoning funds. Is that another function that Blocknative could use to not necessarily make a successful trade, but detect threats and malicious intent?
Yeah, absolutely. The nature of what we do is we see the future, not kind of, not sort of. We actually can see what's going to happen in coming blocks, which is a pretty powerful position. We're not the only ones, but we're pretty much the only public project that is providing sort of enterprise grade tooling and infrastructure for doing so. And so the applications of this core infrastructure are fairly broad. One is to identify trading opportunities, to do this across chains, so not just on Ethereum, but in multiple applications, to do multiple chains like Binance Smart Chain we support, and Polygon we support, and Bitcoin we support, and others coming soon. But to then understand what are the nature of those transactions. So, hey, if I can see the future and I can see a big ARB opportunity forming, I can act on that. But similarly, if I can see the future and I can see a very strange transaction that's going to result in a very large balance change of a certain protocol, or something very unusual seems to be happening, there's all sorts of possibilities. You have seconds to respond, which seems like a short period of time for me and you, but for automated systems and is actually quite a long period of time to do to intervene and to create protections for protocols and trading systems to prevent or to circumvent potentially malicious transactions. One of the other big indicators of this are gas prices. So this is something that our system does pretty much better than anybody else, is estimate transaction fees coming up, and particularly under EIP 1559. And again, what we have seen historically is attacks tend to happen at times where there may be abnormal things happening with transaction fees. And so anyways, there's a bunch of very interesting things that mempool data in real time can provide clarity into, so that everybody can better understand, what's coming next and how to act accordingly.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And you mentioned EIP 1559 there. I'm curious, from your expertise in the mempool, most people have heard of this change and that it's burning some ether, it's changing the gas prices, it's making ETH more deflationary or lowering the inflation. I'd love to hear your perspective on how you saw the mempool change with this EIP 1559.
So EIP 1559 went live at the London hard fork. And basically it's a fundamental reinvention of the fee marketplace and introduces, there's actually a whole bunch of interesting changes that 1559 brought along. We were the first project to support it. We were ready at the London hard fork, which was great. And what it does in particular is it introduces this notion of a base fee, which is set by the network. This was not the case before. The network was not aware of transaction fees or what levels of competition was, and that base fee is required. So regardless of how a transaction gets transmitted and set on chain, the base fee must be paid. There's no way to avoid that. The base fee is algorithmic. It raises up to 12.5% per block, or decreases a maximum of 12.5% per block, depending on demand. And EIP 1559 also introduced variable block sizes to try to balance out supply and demand. But in practice, there's another component called the priority fee, which is a tip for the miners to pay attention. And what's interesting, we see a lot of very interesting data around sudden surges on the network, particularly around things like NFT drops, where what will happen will be there'll be a surge of demand and the base fee will rise very predictably and very smoothly based on the algorithms that dictate it. But the priority fee will jump radically. What actually we're seeing out there is almost a tabletop effect that, at the moment of the NFT drop, it might cost at least 2,000 gwei in gas prices to get on chain. But all of that's in the priority fee and just a little bit's in the base fee because the base fee hasn't caught up yet. And as time rolls forward, as block rolls forward, the base fee rises and the priority fee shrinks. And these two systems, one is algorithmic, the base fee, one is psychology driven by transactors, interact with each other and basically converge on this. It's about 2,000 gwei. It depends on the NFT drop. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. But you'll have this very sudden burst of activity, which if you're participating in an NFT drop, you need to know to participate. But if you're not, you're cruising along, doing your everyday DeFi stuff, and then suddenly gas prices go out of control. You don't have any context as to why. You don't know what you're going to do next. And this is why our infrastructure provides a lot of clarity and a lot of reduces transaction anxiety for users, because it makes it a lot simpler to understand what's happening right now. And it makes it a lot easier to decide what to do next. Either, I need to really ramp up my gas fees. I need to replace my transactions. I need to be really aggressive about getting transactions on chain. Or, you know what, this isn't that urgent. Gas prices are a little out of control. I'm going to hang off and wait a little while. And, this is the sort of broad-based capability that we provide to all members of the ecosystem. And increasingly what we're seeing is wallets themselves incorporating our data and API into the user experience. So the user doesn't have to know to go check Blocknative's gas estimator or to go get this data feed. The wallet can actually present that directly to the user so that it's just one less step for new users of the ecosystem to have to understand and go through so that they can transact with confidence.
Definitely. Yeah, great information. And you're right about new users using DeFi. The transaction fees are, if you're trading a small amount, they're fairly high. And when they jump up, these NFT drops and other special events where everyone's transacting at the same time, people are trying to figure out, why did the fee just double? It's sort of unexplainable until you look at Blocknative and you understand what's happening. Yeah,
it turns out everybody cares about gas prices. Doesn't matter who you are. No one wants to overpay. No one wants to underpay. And it's a tricky problem, particularly under 1559. It changes how you need to think about things quite substantially. And so that's been really great for our business. We have one of the leading gas estimators. You can find that at gas.blocknative.com. And it will tell you about the base fee and the priority fee and how they're changing. And it's a really great resource for anybody who's transacting in the ecosystem today.
Very cool. And I want to look forward. Matt, you mentioned you're working with multiple blockchains already. I'm curious if you have any hints into what other major updates are coming for the roadmap for Blocknative for the end of this year and into 2022.
We have quite a bit planned. We have a very aggressive roadmap. We've built sort of our base foundation infrastructure, and now we're building things on top. And fundamentally, what we're focused on is improving our gas estimator and gas API, because there's been a ton of focus on that. Recently, Gas Now shut down, which is one of the top gas estimators out there, because they're based on Spark Pool, based in China. So the whole operation shut down. We've seen a massive influx of activity and interest in what we're doing. So we're adding new capabilities to our gas estimator, available at gas.blocknative.com. We're expanding our capabilities of our gas plugin. So today we support Chrome and Brave. We're seeing a ton of requests for Firefox support, and there's a whole rich roadmap that we're building there. We have a lot of new capabilities coming to our Mempool Explorer, which is a visual front end for working with Mempool data. You can get that at explorer.blocknative.com. And we have a historical data archive of over 100 terabytes of historical Mempool data that we're getting a lot of requests now for access to. We don't have public APIs for that yet, but we have all the data. And so we'll be introducing APIs to our archive that will effectively allow replay of prior transactions. So, hey, this attack happened. What was going on in the mempool? We have all that data. Or, hey, if I had this algorithm, this trading strategy operating at this time, how profitable would it have been? What would have happened, right? Mm-hmm. So we allow sort of, it's almost like TiVo for the mempool. And we'll be commercializing those capabilities and bringing them to market in the coming months. And then looking out at 2022, we have a whole bunch of exciting things planned that we'll be sharing with the marketplace as soon as they're available.
Very cool, Matt. Thank you so much. And for the viewers that are looking to learn more about Blocknative, go into the communities, and also to start using the Explorer and using that information to make important decisions, what's the best way for them to get involved?
So best starting point is going to be our website, blocknative.com. You can access our entire portfolio there. You can get started. We provide free access at our prototype tier to go hands-on. We also have a great blog that has tons of information about Mempool and Mempool data and all the stuff I've talked about today. The archives of our blog are really quite useful. And then we have a vibrant Discord community as well. Again, you can access that via our homepage. But bottom line, if you have questions, if you want to talk to and connect to other people who are active Blocknative users, our Discord community is the best place for that. And then finally, Twitter. We're at Blocknative on Twitter. You can follow us on social. But we're really happy to engage with the community wherever the community wants to engage with us. And we're really just fortunate and humbled by the level of interest in what we're doing. And we're growing the team very rapidly right now. So folks who are looking to join a vibrant project that has really deep technical credentials and a very competent technical team, go to our career hub on our webpage. And we're constantly adding. We've been growing quite a bit. We've been really successful in hiring recently. And any of your listeners who would like to join the team in almost any role, we'd love to hear from them too, okay?
Amazing. Thank you so much, Matt. I will leave all of those links in the description box below. All the best with Blocknative moving forward, and let's follow up in the near future.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ashton. Appreciate it.